everyone. Also, I took a huge gummy before doing this, so take that as you will. Today we're talking true crime. One of my favorite true crime stories, actually, since I was like a younger person. A little background, I'm a criminologist, right? I have a master's degree in criminology, and I've studied mass amounts of true crime. There it is. I'll say it. I don't care. Within that, specifically in my undergrad, I specialized in, or like focused on concentration, and my major was psychopaths, sociopaths, and serial killers. The story that I'm going to tell you today falls right into that. I did write a full script. It was really good. It was really good. I wrote it very criminology style, right? So the way I would write my master's program. And then I recorded it, read it, and I was like, I actually don't know who the fuck is telling me that story because it's not me talking. I put it into bullet points, and I'm actually going to just kind of riff the whole story to you. So buckle up, let's set a scene, and let's go. Dog. We're gonna see how this turns out. So California, right? It's the promised land, gold rush, suburb, opportunity, post-World War II. Sociologically, we call that the post-war suburban ideal as the expansion of the suburbs, bringing people out of the cities into areas of affluence. Really good environment to raise a family in. Average middle-class people. Average as hell. The place is just beyond normal. The only thing that's cool about Santa Clara County is that's where the Winchester Mystery House is. I want to talk about that, but we'll do that another time. Richard Chase, who I'm talking about today, was born there, but moved north to Sacramento. Wow, let me back up a little bit. California, promised land. Gold, suburbs, safety. That's a little wrap up of what I just did. Interesting at that time, so let's say 1950 through 1988. Through that time frame, while there was continuous growth in population and opportunity, money and expansion, there was a lot of land. California at the time was historically the epicenter of serial violence. So think D'Angelo, Ramirez, Kraft, Chase. And Richard Trenton Chase is a unique story. I think it's hard to ignore. I think it's one of the stories that we need to discuss most, especially in criminology. It's a tough story to tell, unfortunately, and there was a lot of mistakes. So stick with me. It's a rough story, but I'm high enough to tell you, and hopefully we can get through this. Anywho, Richard Trenton Chase, born 1950, Santa Clara County. It's in California. His family, his mom, her name is Beatrice. And his dad, funny enough, his name is Richard. Weird. Maybe a junior. I don't know. I don't know the father's middle name. Okay. The mom was always said to be domineering, and she was described once as the mother, which refers to this very outdated psychological theory that parents who have cold and contradictory behavior can cause schizophrenia in their children. So think very cold refrigerator mom, but also way overprotective of her children. It's contradictory. It led to the idea that like a parent like that, mostly mothers, can lead to the unstable mind. Is the idea completely debunked and outdated from a criminological lens. We don't blame one parent's behavior. We think it's a mix of biological vulnerabilities and environmental stressors. Okay, those two things combined create these vacuums of personalities, but it's not because of one single parent.
Since you got your degree and you know every fucking thing.
So I guess Richard's mom, she's off the hook for now because that bitch is, she fucking did a lot. She did too much of not enough. Dad, on the other hand, he was very passive, not laid back. I guess he just didn't really give a fuck. He was often described as his wife's spokesperson. So he was an authority through her voice, basically. Her decision was like, you tell the kids this. It created this weird environment where instead of having several, or at least two, stabilizing factors in the home, mom and dad, dad and dad, mom and mom, they and them, there's got to be at least one good one. There should be. Unfortunately, it was just kind of a regime under Beatrice. Because of that, Dad didn't really give a fuck. He just kind of said what Beatrice said, and that was it. Richard Chase, he's a young kid growing up in this pretty normal family. Awkward dynamic, but from the surface, it's not a horrible, terrifying beginning. There's plenty of other beginnings that are much, much worse. This is a pretty good one as far as they go. Richie, RTC, I like to call him, Richard Trenton Chase, he grows up, continues to grow into a young man, and as all young men like to do, like to find a partner. Could be man, woman, they, them, gays and days, and she's and hays. It could be whoever, but they look for a way to explore sexual ideology. And it was with a certain girlfriend he had when he was around the age of 16 that they explored, naturally, as they do. And unfortunately, Richie wasn't able to get to or maintain an erection. And it's at this time I would say that paranoia is planted. So he thought about that and he couldn't let it go. The two of them stayed together. I mean, the stress wasn't too bad at first, but it became a little more overbearing as 16, 17-year-olds. It's a little hard to get over that lack of hardness, and they actually split up. I think that was one of the biggest turning points in Richie's life. It's connected to his masculinity. It's a whole identity crisis. It all shifts into a situation that could have just been psychological, even. You could have been nervous. It turns that into this, my body's broken, my blood can't circulate. It turns into my blood is turning into fucking powder. Yeah, so this is at like 17. He's really convinced that now his blood is turning into powder. So I think the best thing for him to do at this point was to go to college. He went to the American River College. So it's the first time Richard is not at home with his parents. He's not at home with a familiar social group. He's with people his own age, people who might be able to notice things that his parents couldn't, or maybe they didn't, right? Or they really weren't looking. I don't really know. But other people could notice these things. And on the flip side of that coin, the other thing that we begin to notice in Richard is heavy drug use. I know, I'm not saying drugs are bad, okay? But he got specifically into LSD. Very powerful hallucinogen. It can trigger latent illnesses in someone's mind, right? Not that it will or always does, but it can, especially if you're psychologically vulnerable, or I would say biologically predisposed to certain illnesses. I don't think hallucinogens have ever been proven to be good for those situations. I think they help other people expand their minds in a different direction. But not for Richard. You'll see in a little bit, he's diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic, and I think the heavy use and self-identity crisis was a huge turning point for him to say, I don't know what's happening, but I also don't know what's real and what's not real, even when I'm not on LSD. And that's the problem. He moved out. He got 2 roommates, 2 girls, Sydney something or other, and another girl. They lived there for 3 months, and that's all they could handle. They said that he was too paranoid, too erratic, and his obsession with his body failing was taking over everything. One roommate eventually said that it was unsettling to live with Richard. It's unsettling to live with Richard. Okay. The fucked up part is that with Richard not really having that home or close friend social network, that social, what do they call that? Sociology, like group of people or your fucking, family system, I think. With losing people in those relationships also takes away the barriers, right, that can help us externally stop or at least slow down erratic behavior. And what I mean by that is that, you're like, oh, my mom talked to me and I calmed down. Those relationships help people express stress, manage stress, right? But also to form a proper response to stress. Fortunately, in Richard's case, though, people didn't intervene. They always just left. So he never gets help. He just becomes avoided. I understand, because given the time, there wasn't the tools available to anyone around him that could really help him in a way. I mean, there are things that they didn't do, definitely, that fucking made this worse. It's just that no one intervened, right? And it just kept happening, as you'll see. So I think it's 1973, perhaps. He gets in a spat with his parents, right? They're finally fed up with each other. And Chase decides to move to Los Angeles from Sacramento to live with his paternal grandmother, right? So it'll be his father's mom. Yeah. Through his grandpa, which I don't know why they explained it that way. I guess wouldn't that just be his regular grandpa? I guess it's his paternal grandmother, but also his paternal grandfather. So I don't know why it would be described that way, but whatever. Chase ends up getting a job as a school bus driver. Again, at this time, he's thinking that his blood is turning into powder. He gets later into that his actual skull cranium is backwards, and the same with his stomach, it's twisted. So they were like, let's get him into the bus. Let's get him driving these kids around. He actually lost that job pretty quickly because he just couldn't maintain the bus and let it just run on fumes and no oil. It's like he's functioning a little and then completely losing it. It's this pattern with Richard: instability, hospitalization, release, and then worse. Hindsight, right? And the knowledge we have now is so much more advanced than it was then. It's still the fact that we knew how bad it was. It's like the flags were there, right? But they were just ignored for some really fucked up reason. Anyway, so in the late, I think it was 1970s, he's admitted for the first time to American River Hospital. And this is the first place that really gives Richard a shot. They give him an environment that's stable. They give him an environment that's medicated, which is awesome, and he's safe. 3 things that are not really happening outside of there. So it's the first time that he's getting to be in a place that allows him to actually be treated. But unfortunately, that's not exactly the case. He was doing better a little, but there are reports from staff describing that it was found that Richard was still killing animals and drinking their blood. They would always find dead birds around him, and he would have dried, cracked blood around his lips. Because of his belief that his blood was turning into powder, that was the replacement, right? That's what we've learned during this time, is that if he could replenish what he's losing, that would be the solution. So he was like, okay, birds have blood. I need some.
Give me that.
He's actually officially diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. He actually becomes stabilized, for the most part, for a very brief moment in time, which is great. But this works, but then it only works while he's hospitalized. He moves, his parents decide, hey, let's get him out of this hellhole hospital that's really helping him. And I think he needs to be somewhere where he can be alone. So they get him out an apartment on Cannon Street, which is in Sacramento, and he's living entirely alone. His entire life becomes centered on the need to replace the blood he's losing. At this time, too, he's cutting up Grey's Anatomy and stuff, looking at pictures of livers and spleens and everything, just becoming completely obsessed with anatomy, I think, in pursuit of finding why or what the fuck is going on with him, Not that it helps or anything. He's not really reading these books. He's just taking pictures and looking at what is just viscera, you know what I mean? His idea right then becomes, I need blood to survive. And that's quite the escalation. Like I said, he's killing animals, even in the hospital. He is drinking their blood. And at that time, he is still released. So like I said, he's on his own now, not going good. So Papa Richard does his due diligence, and he visits Richie, I think, once a week is what I found. He would come visit, play chess, and he would get the fuck out of there, right? That was really the whole relationship. It's because Richard was living alone. His father did his due diligence and was like, hey, I'm here. See ya. And during one of these visits, his father notices, like, hey, Richard, there's a lot of rabbits in your apartment. There's like a bunch of rabbits in here, you know, which is like kind of like weird. Like, why do you have all these rabbits? Baby Richard says, well, because I've been eating them. So his dad was like, okay, cool.
Bruh.
That's the complete visit. So he goes and says, oh, I guess that's fine that my son's eating these rabbits. Which he was going down the street to a bunny farm and buying them, taking them home, mutilating them, and just drinking their blood. He was doing this to puppies from stores. He was doing this to like classified ads. He's also doing it to like people who were just like, oh, free puppies. He was doing this to like puppies, kittens, rabbits. He was looking for anything that could potentially solve this bloodless problem, right? Or powder blood problem, I guess. So during one of these radical visits, his dad, Papa Richard, comes in and finds baby Richard on the kitchen floor, writhing, right? His eyes are sunken in. He's really pale. He's been vomiting. And his dad's like, oh shit, what happened? You know, and baby Richard's like, it's just food poisoning. I ate a bad rabbit, you know. Already a fucking red flag. Alright, whatever. The dad's like, damn, okay, that's crazy. This looks like way worse than actual food poisoning. So they're kind of forced to take him to the hospital. American River Hospital, where he was institutionalized for a little bit. They bring him there, and it's actually discovered that he doesn't have food poisoning. He has a blood infection because he's been injecting rabbit's blood directly into himself to replenish what he's been losing that's been turning into powder. This is another light bulb for these doctors to say, oh, I don't think maybe he's doing that well. So they stabilize him a little bit, and then they ship him over to Beverly Manor. It's a residential care facility. It's not as intense as Richard needs. They're there for, like, structure. The idea that someone's watching. They give you your schedule. This is your medication time. This is when you have lunch. You know, so it's that kind of shit. But it's not a place designed to help people who are in an active psychological break. So they deal with him while they can. But he eventually starts saying, like, I don't want this medication, you know, I don't want to do this. Since they're not designed to do that, they decide, well, although he is a complete danger to himself and others, let's release him. So they release him, and this is when his mother gets a little bit more involved. Financially, I guess, but it also seems kind of sketchy to me, too. So they move him to a place on Watt Street in Sacramento. This was kind of like the infamous apartment, right? So I think like Jeffrey Dahmer Milwaukee apartment, like that, but Sacramento. So nothing like that at all. So while he's there, he's getting a disability check, which is great, and his mother's also participating financially, and things are okay because he's coming off medication that he's been given for the last few months. He decides, hey mom, what's up? I am looking to take a trip to Washington, D.C. She just goes, hell yeah, I'm in. So she's like, here's some cash. I'll see you later. Have a great time in our nation's capital. He's like, all right, cool. Peace. I'm out of here. He hits the road, never makes it to Washington, D.C. He makes a Louis, ends up in Colorado, and buys a 1966 Ford Ranchero. Yeah, I don't know what happened, but he did that, I guess. Oh, but I also didn't mention that at this time, too. Mom thought it was doing good, like good enough to go on a trip to D.C. She thought, too, in the meantime, I'm going to wean him off the medication that he's been taking since being in the hospital several times now that have helped him focus and slow down a bit. She was like, I'm gonna wean him off those because she's a fucking doctor. Yeah, she says, I'm going to do that because I kind of miss his spark. Richard's spark is gone, which his spark was just like drinking puppy blood, dude. I don't understand. So whatever. She does that. He's steadily declining. He buys a car. He then drives from Colorado. He then drives to Nevada, Pyramid Lake, which is mostly managed and patrolled by the Paiute tribe. And they came across his ranchero. In that ranchero, and on the outside was blood. There was just blood all over, which people go here to hunt too, which is, you know, maybe they're like, okay, maybe there's a fresh kill. Who knows? Let's go find the guy who owns this car. You know, obviously. So they eventually find Richie, naked, also covered in blood. Okay. He says, well, I was hunting, so that makes sense. And it's concerning. So they arrest him, right? They bring him in, question him, and they do note and report that he is disheveled, anxious, suspicious. So they decide to let him go.
Go crazy!
That same blood that was in Richie's car was tested, which was great, and it was found to be bovine blood, but that only makes this more confusing because he was in like the woods by a lake, so where the fuck was there a cow? But also, where is the cow, Richard? Where's the remaining cow? Where's the remainder of the cow, Richard? Did you only take a little? So, whatever. In the same time period, Richard also begins to explore firearms, but his mom says, Richard, I will not buy you a gun. I'll buy you a holster And he's like, all right, bet. That's perfect. I can go buy the gun. Goes to buy the gun. Says, hey, what's up? They're like, hey, do you have any mental issues or anything? And he's like, nope, not at all. All right, perfect. Here's your fucking rifle. Have a great day. He said, hell yeah, see you later. I'm going to my apartment on Watt Avenue, okay? And I'm going to start shooting my gun off in my room into my neighbor's apartments. And no one does anything, okay? So this dude's in his house having a psychotic break, shooting guns in his own home and to his neighbor's homes. And no one calls the police or anything. Huh? It's like another example of no one intervening. Do you know what I mean? It's not like our responsibility, but it's like at that point, someone's shooting and if they shoot my house, I'm calling the police, dude. You know what I mean? Like someone's getting involved. But this also kind of seemed like a point in which Richard was escalating in a way that was testing himself to see, can I shoot this gun? Am I afraid of this gun type shit? You know what I mean? And he could. He also started driving around with his gun in his new Ranchero, 1966, $800, not too bad of a deal. He also kind of just starts shooting in public, kind of see, can I do this? You know, just testing the waters. December 29th, 1977, Richard Chase is driving through a residential neighborhood in Sacramento, and he passes the home of Ambrose Griffin, who is a 51-year-old man who's just bringing groceries from his car into his home. Richard drives by, pulls out his gun, and fires 2 shots. One hits Ambrose in the chest. He collapses, and Richard continues driving. No confrontation, no stop to say, hey, like, who was that guy? His wife saw him collapse and initially thought, oh, shit, I think my husband's having a heart attack, right? There was no signs that someone had just been shot. There was no excitement. It was just boom, boom, that's the end of Ambrose Griffin. So he's like, okay, I did that one. And I think that, again, was Richard testing his abilities or comfortability moving into taking a human life. I would also say that this is still interesting in a way that it shows a complete disregard for human life. So it's not like he's angry. He's just detached. He's escalating, right? He's like, okay, the birds didn't do it. The kittens didn't do it. The puppies didn't do it. Something has to do it. And it's not talk therapy. He begins to escalate further. These next 2 cases are really dark. I won't go into too much detail about them. I can provide my writing if you guys want it, but a lot of it is very, very disturbing. Like I said, I'll read some of it, but just a warning now that it is tough to get through. But in the days following that, the assassination really of Ambrose Griffin, Chase stalking neighborhoods again, and he's devised this system in which if he goes to a home and he checks the door and the door is open, he's invited. If he goes to a home and the door is locked, he's not invited in. And this is where they kind of coined the moniker for him as the Vampire of Sacramento. That and another very clear, obvious reason about the blood thing. But it's just also interesting, too, that he kind of has that trope of vampire, which I don't think he was even thinking about at the time. He was just so far gone on a psychotic break that it was just like, he's like, that makes sense. This makes sense to me. I'm going to do it. The next murder is of Teresa Wallen. And this one's a rough one, guys. She's home alone. She's 22, married, and she's currently pregnant. She is going to take her garbage out from her kitchen to her garbage cans. In the meantime, Richard is checking doors up and down the street. And one of those doors opens, and it belongs to Teresa Wallen. So he walks in, closes the door behind him. As she's packing up the garbage, she turns around, and it's just a dead stare. There is no threat because he's not yelling or screaming. He's just staring. So it was almost just like looking at a ghost. And within that 30 seconds, 10 seconds maybe, your Teresa's handgun shoots once, which goes through Teresa's right hand. She kind of raised her hand to protect herself. First bullet went through her right hand and then through the left side of her scalp. The second shot went through her forearm and then entered her jaw, which shattered her jaw, which then obviously caused her to collapse. So at this point that she was shot in the left temple, no less than 6 inches apart. That was the ultimate kill shot. Richard doesn't care about the process of killing. There's a difference between process and product murderers, especially with like serial and spree type murderers. And in this case, it's the product part. It's the corpse part. It's the dead victim part. And that's what Richard likes. He's a product killer. And as such, he goes on to mutilate Teresa Wallen's body. He drags her into her master bedroom before receiving a large knife and a yogurt cup that he found in the garbage that Teresa dropped in the living room. Returns to the bedroom at this point. Like I said, she's extensively mutilated. She's lying on her back, and her turtleneck has been raised to expose her breast. Her left breast has been stabbed multiple times with her nipple being removed. He then sliced her from torso, from her sternum, down to her left hip bone, which then exposed multiple organs and much deeper wounds. So the knife had penetrated her at no less than 6 inches deep. I mean, thankfully, she was already passed, I suppose, if there's a bright side to that, I guess. Like I said, the knife wounds were at a minimum of 6 inches deep. Multiple organs were removed, including the spleen, both kidneys that he placed on the left side of her abdomen, in addition to the liver, which he placed on top of those organs. He incised her diaphragm, and her pancreas was sliced in 2. It was cut in half. He then smeared her blood all over himself and his face and his gloved hands, gloved hands before he rubs it on Teresa Wallen's inner thighs. And while this is happening, he's taking the yogurt cup that he found and he's dipping it into her abdominal cavity to fill and drink out of. So when he finally decides that he's done doing that, he goes to the bathroom. He washes his gloves and blood off his hands and face and some of his body. And he walks to the backyard and grabs a handful of Teresa's dog's waste, brings it back inside, and stuffs it into her mouth. The expression on her face is said to have just been of fear, signifying that she died during a period of pure dread. This guy's a fucking monster. Yes, he's 100% sick, 1,000%. But shout out to Marcus Parks, last podcast on the left. Mental illness isn't your fault, but it's your responsibility. Even though he wasn't really able to hold that responsibility, someone should have, and it should have been Beatrice or Richard. His father, not him. I mean, obviously he should have been doing that, but like, you know. So once he leaves there, he almost feels a little better. He has more blood, but that can't last forever, right? This is a temporary fix to a permanent problem. So he decides that he needs more blood. And the last thing that did satisfy it, at least to his understanding, was drinking Teresa Wallen's blood. So 16 days later, Richard's in another neighborhood and he's checking doors again. They're locked. I can't go in. And if they're open, I'm invited. So one of these doors he's checking is on Marywood Drive. Belongs to 36-year-old Evelyn Maroth. With her inside the home is her 6-year-old Jason Maroth and her 22-month-old nephew, David Ferreira. In addition, there's also a family friend there, Dan Meredith, who's 52 years old. So evidence from the scene infers that Richard entered the door and first encountered Dan, the 52-year-old family friend, within the main hallway of the home. It's there that he shot twice in quick succession. He shot one right between the eyes at really close range. I would say that's within 6 inches. It's also speculated that the son, 6-year-old Jason, was killed first because on the bottom of Dan's shoes was Jason's blood, so that inferred that he had walked through Jason's blood at some point. Evelyn Maroth and her 22-month-old nephew, David, were also gunned down. Evidence suggests that the extensive blood within the child's crib indicates that that's where he dispatched the child. Chase then, once everyone has been dispatched, as they say, he continues to drag Evelyn's body into the master bedroom alongside her 6-year-old. He first undresses himself and then undresses Evelyn. Chase then extensively mutilates her body with knives he had also found in the kitchen. So Maroth had been stabbed multiple times in her anus, and she'd also been slashed on the neck while Chase was trying to remove one of her eyes. Evelyn's blood was then drained from her wounds into a green bucket. Richard then later used that as the collecting pot, and then found a coffee cup that he could later dip and drink out of. So she's been mutilated in a similar fashion to Teresa Wallen. I won't get into as much heavy detail here because we kind of get it, you know. And then within Evelyn's mutilated body, they did find traces of semen. Again, this is late 70s, so DNA isn't really there, but the idea is still that something happened sexually, which is interesting because it proved that Chase could get an erection and maintain an erection, which is the core problem of all of this. Right? I mean, that's kind of why we're here. When he began to cannibalize her, is that when things clicked? Like I said, that's 4 people are murdered. In the meantime, while this is all happening, I think 6-year-old Tracy Grangard from across the street, she was going to see if Jason Maroth was actually ready because he was going to accompany her and her mom to a trip to the Sierra Nevada. And when she knocked on the door, Chase said that startled him, and he, quote, just took the kid and split. And by took the kid and split, he's referring to 22-month-old Ferreira's body. He takes it with him under his jacket and steals the Maroth family station wagon, which is then parked 3/4 of a mile away from the crime scene and his own apartment. He abandons the station wagon and then brings David Maroth's body back to his home. Reportedly, Chase then severed Ferreira's head, mutilated his chest, removed several organs, collected and drank blood, and also removed bits from the back of his skull so he could cannibalize parts of the brain. Ferreira's partially mummified body was found boxed in an alley between a church and a supermarket 2 months later in March, you know, and it's just... Police start to think that there's a connection. The escalation of this, pure chaotic energy of this, and also the similarities too, right? The obvious collection of blood, suspicious, the quick dispatch, but a lot of time spent after murdering the victim. They're starting to think that maybe this was the work of one person, which makes sense. They actually do call in Robert Ressler, who is one of the godfathers of profiling. So profiles are very helpful. I think a lot of times they're used too late. They're pinpointing someone who, like, of course this type of person committed this murder. Within Robert's profile, he said he would be white, mid-20s to early 30s, disheveled, malnourished, and, like, owned a firearm or something, which is like, shit, dude. Like, he's been shooting people. So yeah, that's the age, 25 to 30, which is the most common age for any white male to then commit homicide, which is just statistics. The neighborhood, he looked around and said, oh, this is a white neighborhood, so he's probably a white person. The victims were also white. His profile said that he'd be malnourished, which all he was told is that it appears that this person was drinking blood. It seems like, yeah, this person has mental illness already right off the bat. Congrats, Robert Ressler. broke the fucking case. And malnourished, right, because he's drinking blood. If he's not really keeping up with anything else in his life, he's not going to be keeping up with that either. So that's my big gripe with the fucking criminal profiling. Same thing with Mindhunter, John Douglas, right? They work together, Robert Ressler and John Douglas, whatever, you know what I mean? I think they dismiss a lot of work that local PD does, and they dismiss a lot of work that people spend countless hours doing. Like in this case, the investigation was still done pretty well. They found Richard before the profile was even finished. They found him relatively soon. A friend of his from high school, Nancy something or other, ran into Richard at, I think, like a 7-Eleven. Richard didn't have a ride, but he was wearing this big orange parka, which is stained with dark brown stain. He also smells, and he's disheveled. He sees her at this 7-Eleven type store and says, "Nancy, were you on the motorcycle when your boyfriend died in high school?" And she says no, and then he says, "Can I have a ride?" But he was like, "Let me get my orange soda first, and then you can give me a ride." And she was like, "Oh, sure, dude, whatever." She sneaks to her car, fucking takes off, and calls police and says, "Hey, like, this guy seems really suspicious, and I know there's been crazy shit going on." And the police are like, "Oh shit, that's our boy. What's his name?" Richard Trenton Chase. So they find his apartment, which is, like I said, 3/4 of a mile away from where he abandoned the station wagon. And they show up, and there's really not much struggle. They actually play a little prank on him first, in a way. They don't want any escalation, right? They know he's armed, so they do knock there. They only go with a few officers. They're like, "Oh, okay, Richard's not home. We're gonna head out of here. So we'll see you later." And they fucking did that, walk away thing, and it got smaller. And within minutes, Richard came out of the apartment and took off into an officer. The guy just caught him. And he was arrested. So at this time, too, it's not about if it was Richard. He was very adamant about what he was doing and why he was doing it. Fortunately, his blood was powder, and this was the way to fix that, which to the rational mind is not great work, but for the irrational mind, it works. So like I said, it's not the investigation in a sense that who done it. So he is arrested. He's charged with 6 counts of first-degree homicide, and he is sentenced on all 6 of them, and he's actually, at the time, sentenced to death in California, because it was still legal in California to be sentenced to death. 10 days later, after the verdict, he was sent to San Quentin, which is actually where Charles Manson was held. I mean, wonder if they were buddies, wonder if they were roomies, and he's there, I believe, for like a year, 2 years, something like that. I think it's in 1980 is when he dies, actually. So he actually is on death row in California, and during that time, he's collecting his medication, which is probably, at the time, I don't know, maybe like Thorazine or something, I don't know. He collected that for what appeared to be 30 plus days, and then he ended up taking all of them at once. Actually ended up just taking his own life, which, I mean, good, what a piece of shit, you know what I mean? But it's still fucked. The entire story is fucked. It just always blows my mind when I research this and I retell it to people, just because it's so obvious now. Like, we'll see similar cases like this in the future, mass shooters, right? Well, they'll be like, well, all the signs were there. Why didn't this click, And I think we'll see that same thing for mass shooters probably in like 20 years. I didn't want to get too in-depth in the trial. Not much goes on. Like I said, it's not a mystery of who done it. They're not really trying to prove it was Richard. They were really just trying to push for the most extreme punishment, which was the death penalty. And they got it. So I don't know. Let me know what you guys think. Do you think he should have been hospitalized for the rest of his life? Do you think he should have been death row? Do you think he should have just done life in prison? Hospitalization forever? I mean, what do you guys think? Give me a comment down below. Let me know. This was a pretty good little deep dive I did. I really love this story, like I said. I'm probably going to do a few more sprinkled throughout. I just love this kind of stuff. So if you guys could, let me know what you think. I'd love to talk to you about it. If you have any questions, let me know. I can finally use my fucking master's degree, which would be awesome. So yeah, I look forward to it. And yeah, let's fucking talk soon.